The Cinematologists, episode 137. The Bill Douglas Cinema Museum. In this episode, Neil takes listeners inside the University of Exeter's Bill Douglas Cinema Museum with the help and guidance of lead curator Phil Wickham. Elsewhere, Neil and Dario discuss the importance of the artefact and the material in cinema history, and the role of libraries and museums in film and wider culture. Special thanks to Scott Barley for the use of his track Fugue for the central part of today's episode. On with the show.
Welcome to the Cinematologists podcast. I'm Dario Linares, and down the line, of course, is my good friend Neil Fox. Neil, great to speak to you after, again, a little bit of a break from the last couple of episodes.
Yes, lovely to talk to you too. Yeah, we are taking our time, aren't we, with these, which is nice, circling back around every now and again. Certainly feels more...
Slow podcasting.
Slow podcasting is the way forward. Yeah, it feels nice to be back talking to you about movies again after what feels like a while.
Yeah, and we've got a fantastic episode that you have recorded this time around. It's almost a sort of self-enclosed artifact in and of itself. So we're going to get into that pretty quickly, and we're going to do some reviews on our next episode. So, because this is such a unique thing in and of itself that you've produced, maybe you could just intro and give the listeners a little bit of a sense of what's coming, and then we'll get straight into it.
Great. Yeah. So we were invited to go up to the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum, which is at the University of Exeter, and seeing as it's actually rare in terms of an episode that we're invited to do that I'm closer, which doesn't happen very often with me being in Cornwall. I took a trip up, and it's a place I've wanted to go for a while, and I thought, I'll go and just talk to Phil, the lead curator, and walk around and see what it's all about. And part of the reason to do it was for that kind of self-contained artifact, was to do a walk and talk, really. It's not something we've done on the podcast, and I wondered how it would go, and I think it's come out okay.
Yeah, it has indeed. And what's interesting, some of the conversations sort of relate to that idea of what museums do in terms of their experiences and how audio has helped that. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about that afterwards. But yeah, let's get straight into it. This is Neil at the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum.
I've just arrived at the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum, and this is a visit I've wanted to make for a while, not just for the podcast, but in general. And the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum is based at the University of Exeter, and I know the curator, Phil Wickham, who I'll be talking to in a bit, and his wife Helen Hanson, and a few colleagues at Exeter. It's long been a place I've wanted to
to come, and I've heard great things about it. So I'm really excited to explore the archive and the displays and see what it holds, see what treasures it holds. I think that if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you've probably heard me wax lyrical about my love of proximity. And a few years ago, I bought my wife, who's a fan of the writer Anais Nin, I bought her a first edition of one of Nin's books, and it was signed by Nin. And I thought this was a really exciting present. Like, you know, my wife loves Anais Nin. She'll love this first edition, and the fact that it's got Anais Nin's signature. And she liked it, but I was like, you didn't seem to be as kind of, you know, overwhelmed as I thought you were. And she, you know, for her, and I think probably the same for Dario, I think we've talked about this before, you know, there's less affinity with those kinds of objects. Not to say there isn't any, but I think certainly I have a real love of being close to things and feeling the proximity that they have to the time or the creator sort of that they come from. I've always loved, you know, visiting graves of, you know, not just kind of, you know, people that I admire or quote unquote famous people, but just, you know, just people and just standing near, sort of being approximate to the source, I guess, is the way of, you know, and first editions and signatures in that sense always make me feel like that's those editions are closer to the time and the source of the person that made them. So going to a library, going to a museum, being around the books and artifacts, and I find it really exciting. I get a thrill from it, and I feel that it kind of connects me to the words or the images or the sounds that you know, are kind of emanated from the people that are associated with those objects in a real way. So I've been really excited to come here and get a sense of this space and its artifacts and its history and the stories that it's telling. So hopefully you'll enjoy my conversation and walk and talk with Phil Wickham, the lead curator at the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum. All right, well, thank you for joining me today, Phil.
Great to be here, Neil. Thank you very much.
We're sitting in the office of the Bill Douglas Museum, which I guess is where you spend most of your time amongst the racks. What is the Bill Douglas Museum, and who was Bill Douglas?
Well, the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum is a public museum. It's accredited by the Arts Council. It's got galleries that are free and open every day to everybody. We've got research facilities. And we're also a teaching facility, so we use the collection in over 100 classes a year here at the University of Exeter and make it available to scholars, researchers, and anyone who wants to be interested all over the world. The museum's been open for about 25 years, and it's called after Bill Douglas, one of Britain's greatest ever filmmakers, the director and writer of the Bill Douglas trilogy and Comrades. But as well as being a filmmaker, Bill was also a collector. So together with his friend Peter Jewell for over 30 odd years, I suppose, from the end of the 50s until Bill's death in the early 90s, together they collected material to do with cinema and film culture. As they went on, they became interested in different things, and they went further back in time particularly, and they started collecting on the optical media that preceded cinema as well. So the collection was then, after Bill's death, donated to the university to found the museum. Peter's still alive and well and still bringing me stuff. And we've also had donations from many, many other people as well. So we're now 86,000 items and rising. And it tells a story, and the story is the long history of the moving image, particularly the story of audiences and the moving image, how people have consumed moving images, how they've responded to what they've seen, how it's created new ways of seeing the world. So it's a very broad collection with particular areas of strength in it, with this kind of coherent, distinctive narrative to it. And I would say, and I guess I would, but I think I can justify it. We are the leading moving image museum in the UK. Nobody's got the sort of accessibility, the range and breadth of our collections, and it's something that is available to everybody.
Yeah. You mentioned sort of certain strengths there. What are the particular sort of key aspects of the collection? You mentioned audiences, but what form does that take?
Yeah, well, the story is all there, but the particularly strong areas would be the pre-cinema optical media and a whole variety of different media and how they relate to each other, how they are a part of the development of cinema, but also how they're really engaging and important in their own right. In terms of audiences, things like cinema programs, even things like scrapbooks that people have created themselves about their love of films, their cinema going. Things like press books, which are really within the film business, but are about imagining who the audience might be. Merchandise, things like sheet music. We've got a massive collection of sheet music. We've got a huge book collection, which includes things like popular biographies, novelizations, as well as academic books. We've also got real strength in stars studies, so particularly Chaplin, well over 1,000 things on Chaplin.
Wow.
Probably about 700-800 on Marilyn Monroe. So these iconic stars and kind of what they mean. But also, of course, thousands of a whole galaxy of other stars as well, but those particularly strong with those two, James Dean as well. So it's really about how people relate to what they see on screen, and how that has shaped the world we live in, I guess.
Yeah, fantastic. You said it's been going sort of 25 years. Are there any sort of key stages? How has the museum evolved in that time? I guess it wasn't always as it is today.
Yeah, I mean, it opened with Bill and Peter's collection open to the public in 1997. It was then called the Bill Douglas Centre for the History of Cinema and Popular Culture, and we changed it in 2013 to the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum. I've been here about 14 years now. All these things go through stages. So first of all, of course, it's acquiring, cataloguing, making the collection available. We're still in the same gallery spaces, but we've in recent years we've had much more people coming to us and knowing about us. So we are tucked away here on campus. We do have plans to have new premises in the future, bigger premises. Obviously that costs a lot of money, and at the moment things are a bit difficult, but we had plans before the pandemic and we hope to take those further on in the future. But in any case, we have greatly expanded the numbers of people that come to see us. We're now actively working in the community because, as well as obviously we're at a university, we serve the university, but we also serve the people. We're a bridge between those things. So in a couple of weeks' time, for example, myself and a colleague will be going into an old people's home, do some work with memory boxes, things like that. We're trying to kind of work particularly with other groups. We've got things for Black History, LGBT, research projects, all these kinds of things as well. So, we're taking a kind of proactive look at, who our audiences are and trying to, appeal to a very wide spectrum of people. We've also had donations from all sorts of other people. So obviously it starts off with a personal collection. We've then had some other significant donors since. People like Roy Fowler, for example, gave probably a couple of thousand things. But also it's people who found something in their attic, inherited something from their granny. We've got some things from collectors. I picked up a donation yesterday from a collector out in Sidmouth. That's very interesting stuff. He'd been a cinema manager to do with that. But also it might be in individual things that people find. Once they know about us, they want other people to see it. They want other people to share in that history that they might have. So we've had an ever-increasing kind of roster of donors. We were getting very, very full, but fortunately I've got a little extension of storage space that opened last autumn, so that's a relief.
Great.
So get more things in there. So yeah, we're kind of expanding. If there's anything that we don't already have that we think is going to be either valuable for teaching or research, or is something that can really appeal to visitors and add to the history that we tell through our museum and our objects, then we're always interested.
Yeah.
So yeah, the museum is definitely on a kind of a long upward trajectory.
Which is fab. You mentioned sort of accessing, or people from around the world can access the collection. How much is that kind of an ongoing process of digitization, or is it different means? And I guess how has that sort of become more focused in the last couple of years? I guess while you've not necessarily been as open.
Yeah, there's a bit of that. I mean, our catalogue was all online and all available to everybody. So we don't have too much of a backlog as long as we're getting things in. So you can find out what we hold really easily through our website. We do have probably about 6,000 images online of material. I mean, digitisation is not a magic wand, so that's actually quite a very labour intensive and difficult process. But we have, particularly some of our more obviously visual things, we do have digital images online that people can view. Over the pandemic, obviously there was a year in which there was very little face-to-face teaching, and we were scanning material for teaching for that. And obviously there were periods when we couldn't open as a museum, so obviously we're using social media channels to at least kind of talk about some of our artefacts. We have blogs, particularly from visiting scholars and stipend holders who come to see us there. So prior to the pandemic, we had people coming from all over the world on that scheme.
Yeah.
But in any case, some of our material is unique, and people come from all over the world to see that. So if you look online, you'll see a blog from some of the people who visited, which include an Indian filmmaker looking at some of our kind of imperial stuff on India from the 19th century, included a Canadian scholar looking at some of our Charlie Chaplin material, a guy from the Czech Republic looking at David O. Selznick, all sorts of different things. So we particularly encourage people to look at new things in the collection. We hope to be reopening the stipend scheme again later this year. But yeah, we still have been able to try and make things as accessible as possible. We've been back in being able to offer research stuff quite quickly. Actually, it was just a few months in 2020 we couldn't do that, and we've been open again as a museum, since last May.
Yeah.
Obviously, there have been a lot of people who haven't been able to get over, and we hope to welcome them back this year. But the website does offer something for them in the meantime, and we respond to inquiries. We're able to do scans for people and things like that.
Yeah. So I love that idea of the memory box taking out, those things, and then just hearing you sort of say we've got 1,000 things on Chaplin. I find it really interesting in this age of everything's available on the internet. But how would you navigate a collection? Whereas hearing that there's that body of work, it feels much more achievable to go in amongst it in a space like this.
Yeah.
I guess you do feel that way because obviously this is your job and you've been doing it all the time. But how have you felt? Has there sort of been an appreciation, I guess, for that kind of work grown over the time you've been doing it, with the way that the idea of research and finding stuff has sort of radically changed in sort of the age of the internet?
Yeah, I think that I don't think anything replaces that field of physically looking at the material, and that's why scholars and researchers want to come. They want to come and see and feel an original piece of work. And of course, the digital is great, and it's a complement to that, and it can make things more accessible, but it's not a replacement for it. Obviously, in terms of digitisation, making images of things is one thing. You can't just digitise whole books. There's copyright things and things that make that less than easy. So, in many cases, there isn't really a digital solution for lots of these things. So, I think people really appreciate the idea of both being able to have a really good catalogue, that you can find things that are relevant to you and is well catalogued and signposts the way to find something, but also like that serendipity of being able to come to the museum. The way we organise things, I could say give a box of programmes from the 1920s, all of which they might find interesting, and they can go through and find something amazing kind of in that. So I think people really do appreciate that. I know the students were really keen to come back and start working with original artefacts again. So I don't think it's like an old people, young people thing. In fact, we find, I think with young people, obviously they have certain expectations about what they might find online, but they are really thrilled when you get everything everywhere in that way, and the difference of actually encountering a physical object, I think, is quite special to them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was talking to a colleague last night. We were out, and she'd taken her first years into the library for her module, and some of them had never been in a library before. You know, and you realise actually, yeah, there is. They just don't know what it is. They don't know what it holds and what it can be. Yeah. You know, but it's so exciting to see them sort of awaken to that possibility. Yeah. In a way which I think is really interesting. Well, that seems like a good point to take a stroll around the collection.
Okay, sure.
Great, so we are now inside the museum.
Yeah, this is the lower gallery. So this gallery is really dedicated to the optical media that preceded cinema and the beginnings of cinema itself, except for this material about Bill Douglas. So we have some of Bill's awards, we've got some archive material from comrades, because we do have some filmmaker archives here as well. Obviously Bill's, but also Don Boyd's, Gavin Losey's, James Mackay's, and some other filmmakers. We've got an amazing collection of photographs from continuity supervisor Pamela Davis, for example. So we do have some filmmaking collections. But apart from this material about Bill, this is mainly historic material in this gallery. I guess the oldest forms of moving pictures, I know there's a debate about cave paintings, but we've got caves. So
those cave fans are going to riot, Phil, when they hear this.
Is shadows and shadow puppets. So we have these amazing puppets, which are reproductions of things that have been going for hundreds of years in places like Java, India, China, Turkey, where you have these amazing, beautiful coloured puppets. You shine a light through them, they create a shadow, you manipulate the puppets so that the shadows tell a story or perform a sketch. So these have been going for many hundreds of years all around the world. You can see here, for example, this is a 19th century magic lantern slide showing a gamelan show in Java, which is a kind of an amazing double, as Peter would say, where you have both a lantern slide and shows a shadow show. In the 19th century, shadows came to the West, and you had all these different kinds of shadow play. In Britain, for example, we have these things, the ombroscopes, which are kind of like inverted silhouettes. You shine a light through them and it creates a silhouette. In this case of Shakespeare or Napoleon. And then right through to obviously shadow artists like Lotte Reiniger making animation films in the early 20th century. But shadows are really the way in which you use projections to tell stories. So they set out a sort of way in which you can creatively use projection.
Fantastic. And I see, I just noticed you've got like an audio guide as you go around as well. So
yeah, we've got, that's Peter talking on this gallery. Peter talking about some of the material that he and Bill collected from what's contentiously sometimes called pre-cinema. So once people understand the principles of projection and of making pictures move, you always have the idea about how you could create an illusion where you think you're seeing something and in fact you're seeing something else. So you have all sorts of things like obviously kaleidoscopes, where you have an ever-changing bits of coloured glass that create new patterns. We've got some nice original early 19th century kaleidoscopes there, originally created for textile design in industry, and then people realised they were a great children's toy. We've also got kind of trick pictures. So this one here, from a distance or at a glance, then you see it's formed as a picture of a skull.
Yeah, I noticed the All Is Vanity one as a skull first.
That's right, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And then you get hidden pictures. This is always a crowd pleaser. This is a picture of Windsor Castle in 1860, so it looks just like a load of trees by a lake. If you look carefully, there's Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, various prime ministers, some royal babies, all there hidden in between the trees. There's 7 in there. All 7 was quite hard, but some people get it straight away. Some people have no idea what you're talking about.
I am one of the latter. So Phil.
So Queen Victoria's there. See that bending tree trunk on the right? That's the back. If you see the gap between that
yes,
and the
I
tree
see it now.
Yeah.
I see it. Hello, Queen.
The kind of leaves and branches making out a face.
Fabulous.
So you have that idea of creating an illusion, of creating a transformation, and that's because the eye and the brain can quite easily manipulate each other. And equally, you've got here projected images, and transformational images, but used on a huge public scale. So the diorama and the panorama. We've got an amazing collection of these.
And it's so interesting, isn't it? Like to just see how cinema evolved. Like you can literally see the techniques of lighting and shadow, and kind of layering in Méliès and people like that. Like it's really closely connected. It's not a separate thing.
And it's immersive. That's the big thing. It's an immersive medium where you feel transported to become part of the picture. Usually, it was bringing the world to you. So there were often panoramas of exotic places people in London were never likely to go to. Or events they hadn't been in. A panorama set up in Leicester Square, showing the Battle of Waterloo and making you feel like you were there, making you feel like you were part of that battle without, of course, the danger of being killed. And it's this kind of vicarious experience that is really important. And it's also like the beginnings of globalisation, the beginnings of people being shown lives that were not like their own, effectively.
And just looking at the kind of the screening format, almost it feels IMAX. And it, like you say, talking about that immersion into that space, the safe space, of being really sort of surrounded by sort of an image experience.
But this kind of immersion doesn't have to be huge. It can also be small. You get little things like this: the peep egg, or the Stanhope viewer. These are little viewers where you get a sense of 3 dimensions. You also get a sense of immersion, even from just looking, in the Stanhope viewer's case, into this little sort of bone area, where there is a kind of very, very tiny picture, photograph usually, and you would see it on your retina as you held it up to the eye, usually of seaside towns, funnily enough. And this follows on from a long tradition of trying to see things in 3 dimensions, much older than cinema. It can be either the peep shows of the 18th century, where you're looking into a box. It can be these beautiful telescopic views, where you're looking into these amazing paper kind of contraptions that are drawn up and give you a sense of distance. Or it can be, in its most popular form, the stereoscope. And we have many hundreds of stereoscope cards, many viewers as well. And these are where you take a picture with a special stereoscopic camera, 2 images, almost but not quite the same. The difference in angle reflects the difference between your eyes. And you would look through the viewer, you would see 1 image with 3 dimensions, creates a depth of field. And these again can be places that you're never going to go, they can be experiences you're not going to have. So you have all these different kinds of ideas of immersion and sensation that you can create.
Yeah, amazing how long we've been tricking the brain into taking us somewhere else.
The oldest things we've got are these books. These are from the 17th century.
Wow.
So first illustration of a projected image published in Britain. So 1658, Della Porta's Magic Naturalis, and then 1671 Kirchner's Ars Magna et Ombre, which is got this picture of an illustration. If you look closely, you'll notice it's wrong. It's the wrong way up, but Rome wasn't built in a day. You've got to start somewhere. And from here, you can have things like the camera obscura. You can have then the magic lantern. And of course, in the East, they already have things like the magic mirror. They already have kind of projection kind of apparatus. These are from Japan. The magic lantern is something we've got many lanterns, and we have hundreds and hundreds of magic lantern slides, and they've been collected here to be representative of the different kinds of slides, particularly ones that move, because that's obviously the connection. So you can see ones with little handles, ones where you move the glass, so you see one image and then you're seeing another image. or you're passing a collection of images through the lantern. In this case, some beautiful pictures of exotic animals and creatures. In the days before David Attenborough, this would be the first time you ever saw these.
Yeah.
And Magic Lantern, again, like many of these media, there's a home version and there's a public version. Every Victorian would have been really familiar with a Magic Lantern show. And they can be anything you want to be. They've got the beginnings of the horror film back in the 1790s, the Phantasmagoria lantern shows, where you go deliberately to be scared witless, and the slides are all manipulated. You've also got lantern slide sets that tell popular stories. So this is a beautiful set of Alice in Wonderland, ripping off the illustrations from the book in story form. And there would be a script that would go along with these. And the lanternist would tell the story while manipulating the images.
Well, interesting, isn't it? Like I was going to ask that, there's a sound component, isn't it's very common people to think of silent cinema or musical accompaniment, but an early part of cinema, and like you say, tracing it back is the storyteller, is the the sort of the oral accompaniment to it. It's really interesting.
Yeah, they're always mediating. They're always there's always a showman, who usually would have been a man then, who would be telling the story, who would be manipulating the images. With lantern slides, they kind of coexist with film for some time, and you'd have lantern slides that would be used for adverts. You'd also have some groups who are very big on lantern slides. These are called life model slides, and they have actors in poses to tell a story, to create tableau. This is a temperance movement one. The temperance movement, who are anti-drink campaigners, were very big on the lantern. And if you're a skilled lanternist, you can create some sort of illusion of movement. You have things like the zoetrope, the praxinoscope, it's a really beautiful original.
That's incredible, yeah.
Which was designed by Emile Reynaud in the 1870s.
That's a really beautiful thing, isn't it?
It's
gorgeous.
There's a great piece of footage of Bill Douglas demonstrating this. And Bill and Peter got really interested in the pre-cinema material, and so from the 70s really started to try and collect these. And in those days, you could still find these if you knew what you were looking for and were bargain hunters. It would be very difficult to put a collection together like this now.
Yeah.
On the internet, everyone knows the value of everything. But these really are an important stepping stone to film, as well as being amazing in themselves, because they create that sequence of movements of images, which is what film uses. Things like flick books are all part of the same. This is a filoscope, so this is effectively a mechanised flick book, and a rather larger version there called the Kinora. This is a very rare one. It has an R.W. Paul film that doesn't exist on film anymore. So they're made as films, and then they are cut up and blown up onto pieces of paper and put into a flick book. And they create, stories and narratives as well. And once you have this, and you also have the development of photography at the same time, then you can have an idea of cinema, effectively. Yeah. And there's a few technical hurdles that are overcome, but with people like Edward Muybridge at the back there, we've got quite a number of things to do with Muybridge. Edward Muybridge is an outrageous affectation. His name's really Edward Muybridge from Kingston upon Thames. He's something of
a bouquet about him.
But he's a photographer that makes his name in the States, both creating kind of panoramic pictures, but then making pictures about motion.
One of the things I love about walking around spaces like this is that you realise that periods are not. They're not finite blocks.
No. So when you've got, the idea of photography, the idea of persistence of vision, there is a kind of a race on. People realise that there's something there that can be created. And there's a number of different pioneers that participate in that. So in Britain, of course, we have Freeze Green, who's a photographer. We have many studios down here in the southwest. But probably the most successful were Edison in the States and the Lumières in France. So Edison, of course, is already really famous. He claimed, I believe he didn't really, but claimed to have invented the electric light and the phonograph. He gets a British inventor called Dixon, William Kennedy Laurie Dixon, to try and invent something that he says would do for the eye what the phonograph does for the ear. And he invents something called the kinetoscope. And this is Dixon's memoir with his own pen notes about how he invented the kinetoscope. Wow. And best of all, around here, we've got what we think is the only surviving menu card of the first private view of the kinetoscope, and that is from 1894, so effectively the first showing of moving pictures in Britain.
Wow.
So I've just got the sound effect here. So looking here. Edison was very nervous about projection, so this is an individual experience. It's more like video games, I guess, than cinema.
Oh, back to VR, as we talked about.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is why the Lumieres win, because the Lumieres always have the idea of projecting images to a paying audience in space, which is what we understand as cinema. So we have here an original cinematograph. So this is the machine that first showed films to a paying audience. There's only 200 of these ever made. This is number 108.
Wow.
So that day in Paris, in 28th of December 1895, when the first films were shown, including the train coming to the station, all those kind of things, then that was on one of these machines. So here we have, you can see how incredibly small it is. So it's a camera and a printer and a projector all in one. There would have been a magic lantern projector put on the front to project the images. You can see here we've got the plate here, showing us an original one. But there were so few made because they quite quickly improved it. These were shown brought to London early in 1896. But you could only do 57 seconds. And quite quickly people wanted to see more, although the Lumieres were quite inventive with what you could do in 57 seconds. So they improved the camera and they changed it and they created new cameras, and quite quickly the Lumieres were kind of overhauled. A playbill from the Argyll and Birkenhead early in 1897 with top of the bill of musical acts, Polverini's improved French cinematograph. So Polverini has improved French cinematograph, means he's obviously ripped it off royally from the Lumieres. But really quickly, there's so much innovation in this short period that things change very, very fast. So you can see here we've got all these handbills and programs from music halls where film is being shown, because of course there aren't dedicated cinemas, they're using existing entertainment spaces. Here you've got a set of cards. These would have been with coffee or chocolate. They're from France, they're called the Tricks of Cinema, and they explain special effects. They're from 1903. And many things happen long before you might have thought they do. So you'd think colour, when's the first colour film? Was it Wizard of Oz or Gone with the Wind or something? It's actually 30 years earlier. So the Kinemacolor film process, patented in 1906, you can make full colour films. It's a projection process, it's not hand colouring. You see, for example, this imperial film of the King and Queen's trip to the Delhi Durbar in 1912. That's a full colour 2-hour film.
Wow.
It's not that you couldn't do it, it's a really interesting case study in how it's a dynamic between technology, the industry and the audience. So you could do the technology and the business kind of went along with it. They showed it for a bit, but it was really expensive. You'd had to refit out all your cinemas, and the audience demand didn't seem to be sufficiently there.
Yeah.
You know, people thought, oh, that's nice. I'm quite happy with black and white though. You know, and it's another few decades before colour becomes the norm. Really. We don't tend to have lots of cameras and things, certainly not after 1920. Here's a special camera though, because we're pretty sure this is the camera that shot the film of the Battle of the Somme.
Wow.
So the original first film of conflict, showing actual conflict scenes, admittedly also with some staged ones. And you can see it's signed in the magazine there, J.B. McDowell. Now J.B. McDowell was the cameraman that shot the Somme film, one of the two cameramen that shot it. Now it's dated 1928, which is obviously much later, but this camera was long obsolete by then, so we think that's probably the date that he sold it. You can see that the camera is covered in camouflage paint.
Yeah.
To avoid glinting on the battlefield. And you can see a picture of McDowell with the camera there, and it looks remarkably like this one. So we're pretty sure that is the original camera that shot the film The Battle of Somme. And that's the joy of collecting, is that Bill and Peter picked this up at auction because they wanted a crank handle camera, and it was only when they looked inside they found the signature and realised it was McDowell's. Yeah.
Incredible. I just noticed on the playbill there's a an engagement called Vampires in big letters.
Yeah, it's 4 vampires in a cockney in France. It's amazing.
That sounds absolutely fantastic. Cockney vampires in France.
Yes.
Yeah. We need more of that now.
How did music all die? So that's the end of the lower gallery here.
Great.
So going up the stairs now, we've got a couple of temporary exhibition cases here, which was changed, but sometimes they did do with research projects going on at the university. So you'll see one at the top that's to do with a research project which is really about the distribution of Western LGBT films in China. But we've done a broader LGBT cinema history case here that's been up here for a few months.
We were just passing fabulous posters, which I just...
Yeah, it's part of our poster collection. We've got a nice poster collection. It's just not enough walls.
Just stopping at the display for the LGBT in China.
And there's a lovely Odeon clock just above it.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
I might get a picture of that. That's all right. So when we were downstairs, those sort of the oldest parts of the collection, the books. I get such a thrill from being near those things. How does it make you feel? Like what's it like to sort of spend your days with the material of the past in that way?
Well, it's great. Discovering something new every day. It's always fascinating. Yeah, no, it's a great job to have. Yeah, absolutely.
How did you? So how did you sort of end up as a curator and sort of involved in museums and archives?
Well, I worked at the BFI for many years. So from my early 20s to just when I was early 40s. So I worked at the BFI for a long time in the Research and Information Service, and then was a curator of their TV collection. It was my research interest. But I'm from the West Country originally, and this job came up, and took the opportunity. So I've been here 14 years now, and trying to, get more people interested in the museum. And yeah, this is the upper gallery. So this is a story really from 1910-ish, where we left downstairs up to the present day. Well, the break is the introduction of dedicated cinemas. So although cinema was invented in the 1890s, people were showing it in all sorts of existing spaces, but they had a terrible habit of keeping burning down. So in an early example of health and safety legislation, they said that you needed to have a dedicated projection space that was separated from the auditorium, which effectively means a dedicated building. So they knew if they built it, people would come, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
So with a brief hiatus around the First World War, there is a kind of inexorable rise in cinema building up to the beginning of the Second World War, and quickly going to the cinema becomes an ingrained part of everyday life in Britain. Britain has the highest cinema going rate in the world proportionately, and you can see here some examples of that. So we have programmes and postcards of early venues. You can see here this commissioner's cap, and an usher's torch, because part of the attraction of cinema was going into a space where you were made to feel special.
Yeah.
And its origins are as a working class medium, and a predominantly female medium as well initially. That was the core audience. So the idea is that, having been the servant all day, you would go and be served. So the idea of having these uniformed staff, having these grand palaces, was to make you, the audience, feel special. You can see a nice example here. This is a picture of the Canning Town Cinema in 1912. So really early in cinema kind of sites. Canning Town then as now a pretty tough part of the East End. But you can see there at the sort of portal of the cinema, 25 uniformed staff ready to greet their customers.
Yeah.
We've also got things that people remember more recently, like the Saturday morning pictures clubs, all those kind of parts of the cinema going experience that people found so special, and loads of opening programmes of cinemas, beautiful ones from the Odeon here, including some local ones. There's a bit of the Regal in Barnstable, so when they tore that down in the 70s, Bill and Peter rescued that from a skip. People wanted to engage with cinema beyond the screen. So that's when you get the rise of the fan magazine. We've got a huge collection of fan magazines going right back to the first one in 1911 in Britain. these examples from the 20s and 30s, you just see really beautiful things.
Gorgeous.
They have amazing paper, it never seems to age. You know? And they're fascinating kind of social documents. We use them for all sorts of subjects here. They're clearly aimed at women predominantly, and they have all sorts of adverts and stories. But also there's a dialogue going on between the fans and the audience and the business. It's not a case of them being kind of like sheep being told what to do. It's they are pushing back against things they don't like and trying to say this is what we want. And that's always been the case as well. You can sometimes see that with these press books. So press books were really for the cinema owners in those early days. We've got them going right back to the 1910s, some really early ones here. The Elder Mrs. Blossom, that's from the 1910s. But they have all these things charmingly called exploitation suggestions. And it's really ways in which they think you can make their film appeal to your local audience through all sorts of different ruses, devices, competitions, talking points, all these kinds of things. They're constantly thinking who the audience might be.
And this one of the exploitation ideas here is to create a Chinese atmosphere.
Yes, this is the World of Susie Wong from 1960, which is a sensitive study of cross-cultural relations, and a not very sensitive selling point is to create a Chinese atmosphere in your local area. So often they miss the mark. And also things that people create themselves. These are scrapbooks. People are making their own kind of response to what they see by cutting things out from different places and putting them together. Yeah. In this case, a rather fantastic fan's picture of Marlene and Dietrich.
Yeah, I mean, that's gorgeous. I wasn't sure it was at first because it's so... And obviously the design of the pages, you've got a picture of Dietrich on one side with these beautiful sort of illustrative sort of flourishes, and then this absolutely amazing picture.
Absolutely, yeah. And here's a fan letter to Greta Garbo. She never replied, obviously.
She wanted to be alone.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
And here, as you'd expect, we've got loads on British cinema. Going right back to the earliest days, we've actually fairly recently got an amazing collection from a guy called Townley Cook, who very kindly left us in his will this amazing collection of silent film stills from British films. You can see some of them here, and sort of advertising boards. So silent British cinema has tended to be underrated. Usually the narrative is that there's a successful period right at the beginning with people like R.W. Paul, and then it picks up when Hitchcock comes in the mid-20s. But there were some interesting films around then. Just a lot of people couldn't see them for a long time.
Yeah.
And we've got lots of Levy Star things here as well. And as we go into the 20s, you can see into the 30s and sound, you can see the development of a kind of distinctive British cinema. Sometimes there are things that people appreciate abroad, like the private life of Henry VIII. And then there's things like Gracie Fields. This is a sort of singing tankard of Sally, Pride of the Alley, are pretty much for British people alone. And the way in which international stars like Paul Robeson were drawn in. He did a number of films in Britain. And that,
because I've just seen this. Is that like a tin or?
That's right. Yeah,
Jesse Matthews
we've got a number of those. Yeah, there's a sort of Jesse Matthews, a big musical star, and a romantic comedy star of the 1930s. So you're getting merchandise.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that certainly there's that common idea that Lucas invented merchandise, but it was a more of a latter phenomenon. I think anyone who's spent any time in sort of cinema museums understands that this sort of fan practice has always been around, isn't it? It's really.
And then we go through the 40s. You often seen as the golden age of British cinema is things like the Laurence Olivier branded cigarettes, for example, and rank starlet hair grip sets.
Wow.
All sorts of things being produced. And through the different highs and lows of British cinema, it's always been a kind of boom and bust industry. There's moments when things go really well, end of the 50s, early 60s, with the new wave, then occasional breakout hits. Here you've got a full Monty board game. But a lot of the time then money disappears, and then there's also a kind of alternative practice that becomes ever more important. So we've got some stills from one of our archive collections is Gavrick Losey. Gavrick was the producer of the seminal Black British film Babylon, 1980. You've got some amazing stills there from the film.
Fabulous.
And you can see some things from our archive collections over here when we look at filmmakers as well. And with British films, there is, however, been a successful kind of set of franchises that kind of productively work on that relationship with Hollywood. So we've got a huge Bond collection here in the corner with blockbusters. We've got Harry Potter. These are films that are culturally British.
Yeah.
You can argue they add to some type of British soft power, but we can't afford to make them ourselves. So Hollywood bankrolls them for us. But it allows British technicians to stay and work in this country and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And with the merchandise, you can see right from the beginning, you've got Bond jigsaws, Bond card games, Bond dolls, all these kind of things are part of the attraction of the series.
Absolutely.
When it comes to filmmakers, as well as the archive material, we've got some nice bits from great directors. There's an Orson Welles Silver Salver, which is embossed with the message "To Ted with thanks from Orson." This was a gift from Orson Welles to a British cameraman called Ted Lloyd, and when Ted died, his daughters kindly donated that to us.
What was the context of that? Do you know?
I think they worked together on a TV adaptation of Moby Dick in the mid-50s.
Okay.
And became friends, and he gave that as a gift. So we have the great filmmakers. You see Michael Powell, Jarman, people like that. But also, there are many people involved in making films. So I mentioned earlier, I think, the Pamela Davis collection. Pamela was a continuity supervisor, a really important role that is always by the side of the director. In those days was sketching what was happening in front of the camera, so get continuity from shot to shot, then you'd write up those reports. A role that was always done by a woman, even when the industry was its height of its masculine.
Yeah.
And you can see Pamela there with her book by the camera. You can see her next to Michael Powell there. She had a 40-year career in the industry, and this kind of photo collection was kindly donated by her sister. And here you can see we have lots on international cinema, mainly as it's been consumed in Britain, but Bill Douglas went to India, he met Satyajit Ray, and he got Satyajit Ray to sign all his children's books that he produced, so we've got a lovely collection of those as well.
I didn't know he was a children's author as well.
Yeah,
wow.
a number of them, with his own illustrations. Yeah.
And it's great, isn't it? Because I think that, why would a continuity person keep the stuff, but it's just people do, there were
some things that were done for her work, and there's some things showing her artwork. Yeah. So it's a really nice insight into what she did.
What's that at the back there, which is this annotated script, is that?
Yeah, so that is
a shooting script,
a script, I think, for a Michael Powell quote quickie called Her Last Affair, signed by Powell and the cast and crew.
Wow.
So again, very special.
Yeah, very special. Yeah, lovely.
So as I mentioned earlier, we've got a huge Chaplin collection of 1,000 things. And we talked about merchandise earlier. You can see some of the earliest examples here, really. These are the first comics to be produced about film. The Charlie Chaplin Screen Book and Fun Book, 1916, 17. You can see here the Jim Charlie. This is 1919, a toy produced using the image of Charlie Chaplin. It's kind of like an acrobat. Because Chaplin's fame is so fast and so kind of, universal and all-consuming that he sets up film, sets up the dominance as film as an entertainment form. It's something everybody understands and is part of everybody's experience really quickly. And of course, because he is involved in all aspects of the film as well, he's the establishment of film as an art too. Yeah. Because he was somebody that was actually respected by intellectuals and opinion formers, even at a time when cinema itself tended to be rather looked down on. He directed the films, he produced them, he wrote them, he composed the music that was played at them, controlled all aspects of them. So you can see, Chaplin with Churchill as an image around here. Chaplin's fame you can see reflected in some postcards that talk about everybody's gone Chaplin mad. So you see the whole range of merchandise there, everything from Toby jugs to handkerchiefs to all sorts of comics. I That's Talcum Powder. Spain.
Chasing Charlie, that looks like Snakes and Ladders.
It is, yeah. That's a board game, Chasing Charlie.
Definitely want to play Chasing Charlie at some point.
Absolutely, yeah. So Chaplin's everywhere. We've also got the biggest Disney collection in the UK. Now, this includes, of course, loads of ephemera and loads of merchandise, as Disney's always been producing lots of those things, dolls, toys, an Alice in Wonderland tea set, collecting cards, but also we've got quite a lot of original animation work. So a guy called Robin Allen donated his collection to us. Robin had written a book on Disney and the Disney artists and their influences from Europe, and he became very friendly with some of those animators, and they gave him gifts, sometimes these original cells or these signed pictures. In this case, this is a picture of Merryweather from Sleeping Beauty, signed by the artist, by the animators, in this case Frank Thomas and Ollie Johnston. So we've got some beautiful things there. So we've got the first film star autobiography, Pearl White's Just Me, published in 1919. And our copy is dedicated by Pearl to Ernest Shackleton, the explorer.
Wow.
Which shows how film stars are becoming the equivalents of other celebrities.
And also that famous people are interested in film stars and have that, that it's not just
they know who they are.
Yeah.
They engage with that. And you can see everything here from Greta Garbo bottle stops. Female stars were the most important stars because the female audience was the most important audience, and they wanted to see female-centered stories. This is a lovely thing. This is Marlene Dietrich's shoes.
Wow.
Donated to us quite recently by a lady called Maida who'd won them in a competition when she was a teenager in the 1930s. Dietrich had been making a film in the UK. The prize offered by the film fan mag that she read was these shoes that she'd worn in the film. And she got one of those and got this signed picture and everything. And then, of course, there's the sort of life of stars after they die or after they retire. Stars can be adopted by new generations. Marilyn Monroe is a great example of that. We've got hundreds of things to do with Marilyn Monroe, and things are still being produced 60 years after she died. Audrey Hepburn is probably more popular now than she ever was when she was alive. Young people really embraced her image. New things are being produced about her all the time.
Is there a kind of a tension or a kind of a feeling that you need to kind of to stay on top of what's still being produced in terms of representing all that latter life as well as like the immediate stuff around the actors?
I think we should, because Marilyn Monroe doesn't mean the same as she meant in the 50s or even in the 80s when I grew up. Her meaning changes according to what we're talking about as a society, so all those things are different.
Which is why you need a bigger space.
Yeah. And then when we get to the male stars, here's a great thing. This is a funeral card and mourning cloth for the funeral of Rudolph Valentino.
Wow.
It belonged to Mabel Normand, who was also an important film star.
Yeah, she was, yeah.
Valentino, of course, the first great heartthrob, his death sparked this kind of hysteria at the beginning of celebrity culture. So here you've got a variety of male stars, some of which were in that heartthrob vein, some of which appeal predominantly to other men, some action stars, some of which obviously were great trailblazers like the late Sidney Poitier, who's represented here as well. And also people like James Dean. So we have a lot on James Dean, who of course only made 3 films in the space of a year or so before his very early death, but that kind of immortalised him as this kind of rebel image that remains very potent today.
Lovely lobby card there. I love lobby cards. So
lobby cards are great.
Yeah,
they're always a really nice piece of ephemera.
And I think my good friend will be very happy that you've got Paul Newman's salad dressing.
Yes,
it's very important, a very important artifact in film history.
Yeah, it is in the sense that he became he lent his film star. Fame to producing something within the industry.
And not many stars would, I think, because obviously you see a lot of obviously the kind of the cool stuff of the day like cigarettes or but there's something about that as I've always loved. It's like you can have my name and my face for a salad dressing.
Yes, yeah.
And there's this thing there which says what we want is more movies and less talkies, which I guess is a kind of reaction against the coming of sound. What's the context of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of jokes about movies and talkies. There's, the endless jokes in the 1920s about constipation are quite a surprise to the modern viewer. But the talkies were by no means inevitable. The idea now is that we think, well, everyone must have wanted those because, why wouldn't you? Because we know that's what happens. But actually, when you look at material, like there's a fan magazine from 1927, so a few months before the Jazz Singer premiere, where the editorial by this incredibly important and influential publisher says, forget about talking pictures. This is, a terrible idea. People will never accept it. Because this might sound odd, but if you look at the time, in the context of the time, then, science cinema was going great. They were making amazing films. The cinematography was brilliant. This seemed an incredible risk. And of course, for a while, people did complain about the loss of quality. Because of the equipment, people couldn't move as much, became quite static. So it was by no means a given, and none of these things are, it's how people respond to what they see. And here we've got, material on contemporary blockbusters, because obviously what happens in the 50s is that TV comes along, takes away the core audience of older working class women who go to TV quite quickly. And the film industry has to see how they respond to that. And they respond by giving people what they can't get on the TV set, by emphasising spectacle and scale. And eventually in the 70s they discover a new core audience, which is teenage boys effectively, which remains the case today, although it's more nuanced than it was when I was growing up in the 80s when only teenagers went to cinema. But you can see here, of course, the merchandise that was produced around the original Star Wars. That sets a kind of path for the film industry, and how important things like merchandise is. These original soap models, for example, the first ever Star Wars annual, these kind of things. And all the kind of merchandise that's still produced. I mean, there's still lots of physical merchandise coming through today. And also, of course, we've got this amazing Jurassic Park dinosaur, which was a gift from Steven Spielberg to Richard Attenborough after the first film. It was terrifying, the realistic model.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And that was, again, one of the things that was so great about the film was the tactility of the dinosaurs. Beautiful.
Absolutely. And of course, we're still collecting contemporary stuff. It's been a bit difficult in the pandemic. There's been a bit less physical stuff around. I'm hoping that'll pick up again. Obviously, the question for all museums is how will we capture things if they become not physical? There's no easy answer to that. That's something we're thinking about all the time.
Yeah. Great.
So I'll just show you just outside, Neil. And in this display space here in the kind of reception area of the building that houses the museum, we have an area that is often student displays. So myself and the head of film, Linda Williams, we teach a third year module at the university called British Screens, where the students kind of do a history of the moving image in Britain through the collection, and as half of their assessments in groups they curate an exhibition. So these are the latest exhibitions, and some fabulous ones here, one on foreign language film in Britain, one on sort of masculinity comparing Britain to America, one here on horror films, and one here on the early working class audience for film. And they select the items, they choose a theme, they select the items, they design the display. And it's a great way for them to kind of learn about working with material culture, to learn about the complexities of moving image history, and also to get some great skills as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what a fabulous opportunity and what a fabulous assignment. To go in and pull out. And again, like just looking at it, you wouldn't necessarily think that. I don't mean this in a sort of patronising way, but undergraduate film students would kind of go in with that level of interest and care and sort of variety. And obviously that's the reality of teaching, is that you realise that on a day-to-day basis. But there's a perception that they're just going to pick out Star Wars. But it's not true at all.
And they do, they want to make it both intellectually rigorous and attractive, and the way to do that is to think about the different things that we hold, think about what they'd offer a passing member of the public, and how they can put together to tell a story.
Yeah, and obviously, like we said before, like the sitting with the material and the seeing the material really changes your relationship to it. I think, fabulous stuff.
Phil's just gone into the racks to find a box on the Beatles, because I am, as you know, writing a book on music films, and a big part of that is Hard Day's Night and the Beatles films of the 60s.
So here we have the original paperback that was released along with A Hard Day's Night. You can see Wilfred Bamble promoted in pretty much the same way as the Beatles. So this is a novelisation based on the screenplay. This was obviously very common at the time, is that you produced a novel. So this kind of cross-media promotion is something that's always been there, whether it's in the publishing or the music industries.
Yeah, I only just learned about this the other day, and it was such a strange thing, because, you know, they play themselves. It is a narrative. They're playing themselves. They're playing versions of themselves in a narrative. But the idea that then a novelisation would be written to kind of, you know, sort of to write around that is kind of amazing. And I would love to read that.
Here's the Pixarama fold book of the Beatles.
Phoning appears to be a team job. Yes.
There's a mention of Hard Day's Night, which is coming up at the time this is produced. So shooting starts next February on a film about the boys set in Liverpool. The script is by North Country playwright Alan Owen. Should be good.
They're not wrong. It was good. Yeah. Wow. Fantastic. So where are we now, Phil?
Well, this is our shelves of published screenplays. So we've got huge amounts of published screenplays, including quite a lot of rarities. Dylan Thomas, James Baldwin, sort of unmade films. I know, but we also have masses of unpublished screenplays. Sometimes they've come to us from filmmakers or actors. So we've got Leo Gen's collection. We've got Ozzy Morris's collection of screenplays that he used as a cinematographer. So you know, a number of things that have been used on sets. But we've also got lots of things that were never made. So we recently got 1,500 scripts from Pinewood, from the Rank collection, mainly 50s and 60s. We've got some big projects on these at the moment because they're an amazing resource. There's some really quite well-known writers, adaptations. Most of them never happened. A few of them were filmed, but most of them weren't. But it's a fabulous sort of alternative history of cinema. If you like, things that never occurred. Cinema plays, how to write them, how to sell them. You know, there's always the idea that, you know, you too can be a screenwriter. That's from 1917.
Wow, that's amazing.
So these are obviously for silent films, but sort of scenarios and stories for early silent films. So you see the chapters on the manuscript and its sale. The value of neatness.
Well, that's something my students need to know.
Yeah. So there are a lot of these early screenplay manuals, guides as well. Famous ones like the New Technique of Screenwriting by Tamar Lane, but also other ones as well that we're trying to sort of, you know, encourage their sort of excitement about film in the public and the idea that they could participate in some ways. So there's a number of these things here: picture plays and how to write them. This would be another early one. So as cinema takes off in the 10s and, you know, into the 20s, then this is 1916.
Wow.
Then you get a lot of these books. And of course you still do today, you know, there's the old Robert McKee, Sid Field, all those kind of people as well.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I read something the other day where they're like, oh, this started with Sid Field, and it's like, you know, it didn't. It started, you know, it's like, it's so connected to, like, say, early cinema. It's not, you know, it's
even when you don't think of silent films as having a script as such, because it's like, of course you had scenarios that people followed to film. So, you know, it was already an important part of screenwriting of the film process. So we have a lot of things here on screenwriting as a craft. And of course, it's always been interesting in terms of women in film. So Frances Marion, for example, is her technique guide, How to Write and Sell Film Stories, who was already a famous screenwriter. It includes one of her scripts. And you know, she was a really important person within the film industry. People like Anita Luce got a lot on her.
Okay.
And when in the Rank collection we're going through now, we're finding, you know, we're seeking out the female writers and trying to sort of, you know, put them back in the spotlight about their story.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking me around today, Phil.
You're welcome, Neil. It's great to be on the Cinematologists. Look forward to people coming to explore for themselves.
Yes, hopefully this will spark a few trips down here. Particularly, I think, you know, the relationship with the university and hopefully the research aspect of it for those people who are a bit further afield, and certainly I'll be back as a general punter, I think, with my family.
So the galleries are open every day, free and open to everybody every day. And the research facilities are open by appointment Monday to Friday every week, so do get in touch.
Well, I think I might just do that for my book before it goes in.
Great. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Phil.
Thank you, Neil. Cheers.
So I've had the tour, I've had lunch, and I spent some time amongst the racks and amongst the displays, and yeah, it's been absolutely just a wonderful couple of hours, I have to be honest. You know, beyond the thrill of just being out in spaces, in places with books and memorabilia and posters and things like that, and cameras and zoetropes, it's just, you know, I love these places. I love being around the objects of the history of the art form that I just love so much. And it reminded me of, you know, why I love these, you know, museums and library as spaces. You know, we have a lovely, at Falmouth, we have a lovely small archive with some of the Bill Douglas collection there. Available, and it's such a lovely space, and if I'm feeling stressed or I've got an hour where I can go and sort of, you know, do a little bit of reading or a little bit of thinking, I used to just be able to go and rock up and sit amongst the books, amongst the history, and read and write and think, you know, and I think there's a real energy and a real power to that, and I know that sounds new age, and I don't really care because I believe it, you know, and I feel it when I'm in these spaces. I feel that they have an energy and a story to tell, you know, and I love being around them, and I love thinking about the hands that wrote the letters, and the, you know, the hands that built these machines, and, you know, the people that have just put their life into this art form that this podcast is dedicated to. And I hope that you've enjoyed listening to Phil and myself just walk around amongst things and talk about them.
So thanks to Phil for taking me around and showing me the sights and the wonders of the Bill Douglas Cinema Museum. I had a really lovely day, and yeah, as you hopefully could get from the audio there, I just had a really good time, and I love being in those kind of spaces. But Dario, I noticed that you made a lot of notes about this ep, and it sort of sparked some things you wanted to talk about. So yeah, what did you make of that audio tour of the Cinema Museum?
Yeah, just well, first of all, congratulations on sort of doing an aural experience kind of edit there. So yeah, was that just with your mobile Zoom mic?
Yeah, it was just with the Zoom mic. I tried to get sort of what I thought might be better equipment But the stores team here were kind of snowed under, so I ended up just taking my little Zoom mic. And there's a few bits where there was a noticeable clunk when I was kind of moving around that sort of impacted too much. And there's a few bits like that where it just it's a little bit of a clunk. But for the most part, it's just I was just being really careful with the Zoom, and it came out really well, I thought, in terms of the general quality of it, for sure.
Yeah, because those Zoom mics are good, but they do, I think it's something to do with the casing means that any little touch on the outside and then you get this massive clunk. So I think it was just amazing that you got the sound that you did, and also the sort of different layers where you're in different rooms. It's really interesting when you sort of move through and you've got the same mic but you're in different spaces that comes across. And it was sort of nice to have the walk and talk element of it, you know, going in and out of the corridors and what have you, and then you sort of seeing something and turning to it and going, oh, look at that over there, and then a sort of bit of a description. And it really sort of tied into that idea of the idea of the audio cinematic in terms of, and I think in terms of sort of being in an environment where you're talking about cinema, but also then that sense of the ways in which what we call now paratext and text interrelate with each other. And, you know, this sense of digital preservation and reiterating the importance of the physical. And we can talk a little bit about that maybe in the bonus at the end, you know, this sort of sense of our differentiation between, you know, maybe, I don't think we're that far apart in terms of sort of putting importance onto material artifacts, but what that actually then means, I think, is slightly different maybe for each of us. But yeah, it was fascinating, that sense of the way in which it reminded me about how when we think about films, we do tend to still think of them in the abstract as their own thing and not affected or contextualized by the paratextual elements that feed into how we watch films, right? So, and it reminded me sort of writing this piece for Mubi, which is still to come out, hopefully, you know, beginning of next month, I think now, on this dichotomy that comes from Girish Shambhu, this there and elsewhere, this idea of the there of watching and the elsewhere of thinking and talking and contextualizing cinema. And it just sort of reminded me that sort of reiterating that as a binary, provoking a kind of separation between the two and talking about it in that way, which ends up being a hierarchy. You know, films as the watching of the film itself is always more important than the sort of paratextual relationship. But in a way, it kind of misconceives cinema to a certain degree, because films are always anchored in paratexts. We can never really watch the films outside of, say, a trailer, but maybe not even something as formalized as that. You know, the idea that we've seen a poster or somebody on Twitter has said, go and see the latest whatever movie. All of these things structure our approach to a text. So it's really interesting how, you know, obviously the Bill Douglas Centre as a film museum is championing that, and how it really is incumbent on people within film culture to keep championing that, whether it's support for museums generally, but support for the very idea of what they are as much as anything else, you know. And that's why I love, you know, something like when you commented on this idea of memory boxes as a process of curation, you know, that whenever we're putting together our memories or our notion of the significance of cinema, this is always a labor of curation. And I know that's something you're interested in, and therefore it's always a discourse as well. It reflects individual and collective cultural influences, and the way that we use the internet today always, in some ways, kind of allows us to abdicate that. You know, we sort of think that everything is available on the internet and we've got this sort of ultra freedom to be able to go and pick and choose, but really, whether it's algorithms or just the way that interface works, we're a lot narrowly confined into the things that we watch, more than we think we actually are in this sort of, you know, this idea of an open internet era. And it came back as well, really, to that question that you posed for yourself, and was sort of the tenor of the entire interview, which is what is a library, what is a museum. It's the importance and the nature of the space, being in the presence of historical objects, and it imbues that sense of phenomenological experience that we're embodied subjects. Everything that we see, feel, and really at the end of the day know is filtered through this embodied experience. So it was just really nice to listen to that and have the sound be able to shape in a certain way that phenomenological experience. Yeah, just I don't know if I've got a few more things I can say, but maybe you can pick up on some of that.
Cool. Yeah, well, thank you very much. That's really kind. I'm glad that it worked in that way for you, and hopefully for the listeners. It was a reminder of like what's changed in terms of the internet, and not just that the access that we think is there, but also the idea of what happens when you're kind of you have that ability on your phone or so close to you, and walking around the museum was a reminder of how pre-internet, and pre sort of VHS or whatever, like the text was a fleeting thing for many people, like they might see that film once, and that would be it. So how did they carry the film with them? How did they carry, and that's all of the stuff around it felt less like, kind of, obviously it was cash in and a lot of it was kind of marketing, but it felt like the things that people would use to access the experience of watching the film again in a much more direct way than people do now, because it's like, well, I could just turn on my phone and I can watch the trailer, or I can even watch the thing, and that kind of what those objects mean felt different in a sort of a pre-internet space, which I thought was really interesting to kind of be reminded of that and to see it all laid out, which was really exciting. And also just that, again, I think that the fact that, and I sort of mention it in the thing, but people kept this stuff, people looked after it, wanted it to be preserved in a way that suggests a connection which went beyond the text of just, this is a film I like, that they thought the thing that represented that feeling was meaningful, and kept it and looked after it, and now it is shared, and that lineage which reminds us that all of these things that we think are new about either paratexts or materiality in terms of the thing, sort of coming back in a very kind of hip way, has been part of the film experience from the first, which I think is just really fascinating, again, to be, because of everything. It's been a while since I've been around so much film stuff. I think the last time was the Kubrick at the Design Museum, and there's something about standing in front of things which kind of elicits a certain response which sitting in front of a screen just can't do.
And I suppose as well it sort of links to what we're going to talk about more when we do these film education episodes, and particularly in the last couple of years, this sense that the library is an educational resource, and the very idea of going to the library and what a library actually is. I mean, you mentioned it in the interview. It's completely devalued because of the internet, and we have this fantastic motion of mobility, which is great in many ways. You can kind of work anywhere and go anywhere, and you're connected to an ether that gives you access to all the information you want at any given point. But the downside of that is we lose our connection to people and to places. That sense that, I mean, I don't know if you were like this when you did your PhD. I mean, I know you were finishing it when we were working together, but there was a sense for me when I was doing my PhD was carving out a communal practice. I went to a space where there were other PhDs working, and there was a lunchtime where we all went and had lunch. And then, with my friend Zoe, we went in the evenings to certain spaces over and over again. And there's something again about that sense of embodied practice, and the library as a place that is free, that's set up to be able to do that, is something that is completely lost. Not completely lost, but you know what I mean. It's just not considered there in the same way that it was before, and I think that's kind of sad. And also, it just reminds us of the neoliberal logic of everything now. It's like, I think libraries are very much devalued because they're not seen as a space that is going to be producing, in an obvious way, economic outcomes. So that's why they're easy to kind of put to one side or devalue in that sense, and then defund, if we're talking sort of politically. But I mean, the other thing about what you recorded there was this connection, or this sort of conceptualization of contemporary cinema, of cinema in the digital age, which reflects that piece that Lev Manovich wrote, What is Digital Cinema, which I've been using on a course I'm teaching at the moment, which connects the digital era right back to early cinema, and talks about the way that the construction of animation and things like what you talked about, the mechanized flick books. There's almost more correlations to early cinema and the invention of technology and stuff like that than there is to the standardized narrative filmmaking that became the staple of the economic industry. And that's the exciting part of digital cinema in many ways. And it just sort of reminded me of thinking about that.
That's great. Yeah. And I think standing in front of some of that stuff, you sort of you realize how things like IMAX and VR are not new ideas, they're new technologies, but they're not new ideas, which just is fantastic and fascinating, like these are the way people have conceived of how to experience visual stimulation for, well over a century now, sort of nearly 2 centuries in terms of some of that stuff, which is, kind of mind boggling. And just on the library stuff, I think what's interesting is like thinking about the library here, and I was in the Special Archives the other day, which we have some of the Bill Douglas archive here, and it's a lovely space to work and to just kind of reach up and grab a book. What I find interesting is that whenever there's a student survey about what students want from the library, it's more space to work. They see it as a place to work that's not their home, but they don't make a leap to the books or the journals. I've had so many tutorials with students where they're in the library and I'm like, why don't you just literally reach behind you? I had a dissertation student saying, I can't find anything on, 80s cinema and masculinity. I'm like, there's a shelf, because your algorithm is configured to your taste and you're a bit outside of your taste. It's not showing you things that are there, but there's loads of books on that, just take a walk along the racks and see what else is there and see what it's sitting next to and make those connections. And that's a shame that they don't see it as a space for that. They see it as a space to do their work. And our library has grown. It's a lovely space, but it's grown at the expense of the collection, because they put more tables in and they put more cubicles in, which means less room for artifacts. And it's like, well, we're just, we're creating more space for people to Google information, which is not a library.
Yeah.
That's just a workroom or there are loads of those, and we're very lucky to have a great collection.
Or it's a meeting space, isn't it?
Exactly.
Where the library is designed in a sense where conversation now it's natural to take place. That's always the thing I remember about the Falmouth Library, and it's slightly different than St. Peter's one here, but where at Falmouth they had to create a quiet rooms because nobody was going to be quiet because it's got this open plan effect, hasn't it? So it's changing the nature of what the expectation of the experience is going to be in terms of learning, but also, as you say, sort of the focus of attention becomes each other and conversation and online rather than what's on the shelves.
Yeah, which is needed and necessary, but that's not a library, is it? It's about what's in the books and it's about what's in the journals and the films and the artifacts. And I think that students would have a more productive experience if they were to just, again, lift their head up and just say, what's along here? We've got so many film books, and it's just a way of seeing the world that they don't have access to, that they kind of need for their studies, at least, if not to be kind of better cinephiles or more engaged filmmakers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe we'll leave it there, and we'll head off to our bonus morning cocktail party again. Sans cocktail, maybe coffee instead. But maybe we can talk a little bit more about this idea of working in specific material environments and our relationships to sort of the idea of material objects and artifacts, and what, how they're imbued with certain significance individually or not, as the case may be. But yeah, so just to say, congrats on the episode. And I thought Phil Wickham was really great. He seemed to intuitively, lend himself to the spirit of what you were trying to do, which obviously makes it a lot easier. If that can often be quite difficult, as we know, sort of sticking a microphone in somebody's face and say, be spontaneous and what have you. But he was very good, I thought, and just, well done on the episode.
Thanks very much. Yeah, thanks again to Phil. He's a pro. He's obviously done that tour quite a lot, but it felt fresh and it was really enjoyable. And I'm really pleased that it came out as well as it did. And hopefully people will make a trip there. It's well worth it. Fantastic.
So we are going to call it a day there. We have another episode coming quite sharpish on the back of this one, where I'll be talking to a filmmaker called Cherish Oteka about a film that she has made called The Black Cop, which has been BAFTA nominated, a short, which is again an unusual one. We've done some shorts episodes before, but this one focusing on one particular short film that has a lot. We've got a lot to say about it, so that's good. That's it. Thanks once again to our audience for your continued support. This has been the Cinematologists podcast. Thanks for listening.